So now we're going to start talking about space requirements, and this is going to take up quite a lot of the next couple videos when we talk about space requirements, but it is the next step in the systematic approach. So space requirements we're going to look at in the same way we looked at flow requirements, where we looked at the most micro level, the workstation flow. In this case, we're going to look at the workstation specifications necessary for space. And then from there, we're going to take whatever we've designed as the space for the workstation and then figure out how many workstations are going to be needed in a particular department. And then the next level is looking at aisle arrangements and visual management. Also within this topic, we're going to talk about line balancing. It has to do with the different ways that you're specifying workstations. Just be careful of a concept that's called Parkinson's law, that things expand to fill space available. It's sort of like nature abhors a vacuum. So when you're doing space requirements, you need to be careful that you don't just look at what's there right now, because it probably has filled up the space available and not necessarily the space necessary. So we're going to look at the systematic bottom-up approach, where we're looking at the workstation specifications first. Within the workstation, we're going to look at three areas: equipment needs, material needs, and personnel needs. This right here is a picture of a Google SketchUp that you will be able to find on in the Google libraries. This is just an example of what you can do. It'll really help to visualize what we're talking about when we talk about space requirements. So in the equipment, having to do with equipment, there's going to be four things you need to look at. These are all specified in the book, this particular breakdown, but I think it's a good way to kind of look at it from sort of a hierarchical sense. The equipment, so what's necessary for the equipment themselves, like what space, what footprint does the lathe machine take up? And then in addition to that, is there any kind of machine travel? Is it a robot that has a swinging arm? You need to be careful of that. So it's not just the footprint, but the travel associated with it. You also need to think about maintenance. Where are the maintenance aspects of this machine? And you need to build in space around that particular piece of equipment so people can access it for maintenance. Also plant services. This has to do with any kind of piping or electricity or utilities that has to go into the particular machine. Those also need to be planned for. When we look at material, we're looking at four types of material. One is the inbound material. So when you have a batch that's waiting to be processed, where is it going to be sitting? Where is it going to be in the workstation, how much space it's going to be taken up. This also relates to how you're doing inventory or how you're doing production control. What are your batch sizes? Are your batch sizes single units, or are they groups of 10? Are they on a cart? So it also relates to material handling, how you're going to be doing that. The in-process materials. Now, sometimes the in-process materials can just fit on the workbench, and as long as the workbench is big enough for that, it's perfectly fine. But if they're awkward in any way, if they need to be maneuvered in any way, you need to take that into account. We were working for a company in C&D Aerospace, and they were working on big plastic parts that go in the interior of an airplane. And you needed to handle these in a way, and they're very awkward. You needed to plan for that in the workstation design. Storing of the waste in the scrap. So there can be some waste associated with, maybe it comes packaged, so you need to unpackage it. Maybe you're actually machining it and there's going to be wasted pieces of machine metal that are left over. And then the fourth area is looking at the tools and fixtures and dies that might be necessary to store. For instance, at Ernie Ball in town, they have many different dies to hold the different types of guitars that are machined on the CNC machines. They have particular places to store that, and they have to think about accessing that. Those are the kinds of materials you need to be thinking about in the space requirements. And then the last area is the personnel, the person themselves. You need to think about the operator. How is he going to be in the space? What amount of space is necessary for him, for his chair, for his moving around. You also need to think about material handling. So if he's using a forklift to move things around, or a hand cart, or maybe even a crane, that needs to be taken into account when you're doing the space requirements. Also, operator ingress and egress. How is he getting in and out of the workstation? So now we've moved up to the next level, once we've decided how big the workstations themselves are going to be, we need to talk about, well, how many of these workstations do we need? And that means that you need to think about how many they are, but you also need to think about the the support system around the workstations. We're going to talk about how to calculate the number of workstations in a minute, but there's also issues like department services. Is there going to be one desk that maybe has maybe the time cards on it or something? And then how many workstations are going to be in the department, and then you add all these workstations together, and then on top of that you add aisle requirements. And often at this level it's just done as a percentage, and this is one of the ways. This is a table from your book. It says if the largest load that's moved around within the department is less than 6 square feet footprint, then you need to add 5 to 10% allowance to the workstation size in order to get the size of the department. And this is just general guidelines. When you actually lay it out, this might be different, but this is sort of general guidelines to look at space requirements. Looking at the aisle arrangements themselves, so this is going up from the higher level to the flow within the facility, so aisles between departments. And then in this case, you need to look at what kind of material handling you're going to be needing. And that often specifies how big the aisles can be, and then that means that also then specifies the layout. This is also a guideline associated with the width of different aisles depending on the kinds of thing that's happening in the facility with material handling. And the book also has a more detailed look at this, like if it's a two-way travel versus one-way travel. So you might want to look in the book for this particular thing. So now I'm gonna actually leave you with this question that I'm going to have you attempt for homework. It is looking at if we have how many machining areas are we going to need in order to meet this particular demand. So first of all, there's some sort of allowance that you need to apply for a scrap rate, and then you need to calculate how many machines given a certain work time and a certain efficiency of the machines and of the workers. So if you could go ahead and look at that calculation, we will you'll submit this online, and we'll also talk about it in class.